One of the things I find most fascinating about learning and meta learning is that we can keep adding other layers by taking another higher perspective, by adding models, by stepping back and looking at that as the object, and then stepping back and then looking at that plus the perspective we had as the object. And it's not something that, it's not intuitive to do that. It's not something that we would do automatically. It's something that we had to learn to do from other great minds and great masters that have come before us. Freud figured out something really interesting that probably the Buddhists had been talking about for a couple thousand years, which is that we spend half or more of our lives dreaming. Most of us are actually dreaming most of our lives, and that includes when we're awake. Okay, a sleeping dream is one where all of the content is being created by your psyche, and the waking dream is where we're looking out into the world and there appear to be other people in a world out there, and we're weaving a narrative, confabulating a story about why things are the way they are, but we're still actually dreaming for the most part, projecting the dream onto that. And what's pretty exciting about being born now as opposed to almost any other point in the history of existence as we know it is that a lineage of other humans, especially over the last few thousand years, has figured out that we can wake up to another state of awareness. When I first started really learning about self-help and personal development 20 years ago or so, I listened to Wayne Dyer a lot. Anyone here a Wayne Dyer fan? Right? Wayne's awesome, isn't he? And I was listening to an audio program, and I remember I was in my car. I was in San Diego. This is probably, I could even kind of say, it's probably like 17, 16, 15 years ago now when I heard this exact thing. And he said, the great spiritual masters have learned that there's a state that we can wake up into from our normal waking state of consciousness that's as dramatically different as this waking state is from the sleeping dream state. There's another one. And the way to do it is to bring our attention and our awareness intentionally, and then to practice with it. Yeah? And what I've learned is that this higher state, it's not something you can just snap your fingers and do. And in fact, if you talk to spiritual masters, most of them, they haven't reached a point where they just live in that other state. They go there and they spend time there, and then they come back and they kind of oscillate back and forth. But spending some time there is very, what you might say, enlightening. And I think that it's an important part of taking your learning to the next level, taking your awareness to the next level. And when you take this consciousness, this higher awareness, and you integrate it with learning and meta-learning, again, doors open that weren't available before, doors to be able to see yourself and to see your own limiting patterns of behavior, to see your relationships with others, with the world, sometimes with other things like food or substances, in ways that snap you out of the trance long enough that you can realize that you need to make a change. And then that can be the catalyst that can really make a big difference. All right, so what is attention? What is attention? Yeah. Turn to the person next to you and tell them what you think attention is. What do you think attention is? All right, so let's try an experiment. Notice the sensation in the big toe on your right foot. And now notice the sensation in the pinky on your left hand. Notice the temperature that you feel of the air around you on your body. Notice your mood or your emotional tone. Notice how you feel emotionally. Notice any thought that might be going through your mind. As you do that, you are directing your attention. Right? So, your big toe is not your attention. And neither is the pinky on your left hand. And it's not your emotions. But it's that thing that you can direct to reach out and feel those things, to feel your mood. You got it? So your attention is not a word, and it's not a symbol, and it's not an idea. Your attention is not exactly a real thing, but it's something. It's kind of emergent from real things. Try this. What's the distinction between attention and will? What's the distinction? What's the difference between attention and will? It's a great question to ask. Roberto Assagioli, who Wyatt turned me on to, he wrote a book called The Act of Will. And his great insight is to move identity from identifying with the body, the emotions, and the mind, and the ego, to identifying as will itself. Because will is a great differentiator that we have. And when you identify as your will, as willpower itself, well, something happens where you can exert a lot more influence over the body and the emotions and the mind because you're identified at a more transcendent level. So that's the direction of attention. And whatever you experience as the common denominator between all of those things, whatever it is that's allowing you to move around from one to the other, that would be a definition of attention. But it's not a word definition. It's some other type of definition. It's a felt sense. It's a felt definition. Now, the spiritual masters, from the Buddha to Gurdjieff to Alan Wallace, who I've been reading a lot of his books. He wrote a book called The Attention Revolution. I find his stuff to be excellent. What they do is they start asking a series of questions about attention itself, to help in the cultivation of it. Okay, so the first question might be, was attention present? Was your attention actually present? Because you notice that very seamlessly we slip from directing our attention to our attention kind of being, the autopilot gets put on and it just gets put into all these different places, and then we wake up an hour or a day later and we say, wait, what happened? And have you ever driven home and you drove home from somewhere and you got home and you remembered, like, I was somewhere other than driving. How did I get here? You ever driven somewhere and you got that experience? You know what I'm talking about? Well, that's what happens to most of us most of the time, except with our body. And we wake up once in a while and we go, wait, how did I get here? And what part of me drove me here? So was attention present? And this experience of directing our attention to different parts of our body and our emotions and our mind, that's a practice to make our attention present. Okay, so was attention present? How long was it present? So what was the duration? Was it just a moment, like 1 second of presence, feeling, sensing? Was it 10 seconds of presence? How long can you maintain presence before you lose it, before your autopilot takes over? Yeah? So here's what we'll do. We'll do a simple meditation experiment of maintaining presence. And the only instruction is maintain awareness, attention on the breath. That's it. Okay, so we're going to close our eyes. We're going to breathe. And we're going to keep attention on the breath. Go. Good. Who had the mind try to slip at least 10 thoughts in while they were doing that exercise? Good. Okay, I had a few. Okay, so that's the practice of extending. There's a great exercise that comes from Sakaida in Zen. Lost the name of the book. It's a great book on Zen and has Zen in the title. It's on Zen meditation. And what he talks about is you breathe halfway in and stop, and then breathe the rest of the way in and then stop, and then breathe halfway out and stop, and then breathe the rest of the way out and stop. Okay, so halfway in, all the way in, halfway out, all the way out. It's a cycle of 4. And his great insight is that when you stop breathing, when you pause in breathing, it really assists in stopping the mind. There's a connection here. So let's do this practice again. We're going to breathe in halfway and we're going to stop. So it's going to try to breathe loud so you can hear it, although I don't want you to breathe loud. It's going to go like this. You follow? In the spaces where you pause, put your attention on your mind and notice that when you're paused, it assists in the stopping of the thinking. Okay, so take 5 breaths like that. Close eyes, breathe halfway in, all the way in, pause in between, and notice, keep attention on the breath, and then in between when you're paused, go to the mind and notice that it helps silence the mind. Good. Okay, who was able to experience during one of your pauses just noticing their mind stopped a little better? Great. Okay, so that's an exercise that you can do, is to put intention into the breath. Okay, intentionally. It's one of the interesting functions that most other animals can't control parts of their kind of autonomic nervous system. We can control breath, we can control blinking, we can control a lot of things that others can't. It's one of the reasons why other animals can't talk so well, is they can't control their breath. So right now, the world that we live in, and we'll go into productivity in a kind of a later section, the world that we live in is becoming spectacularly distracting. Okay, and spectacularly distracting in ways that are addictive. And I think one of the reasons for it is these things that, one of the terms they're calling them is super stimulators. We're able to concentrate and refine down all of the power and kind of magic kick of something into a refined substance, and then introduce the human chimp to it, and our chimp goes, "That's awesome!" You know? And for example, my wife and I are in a continual discussion about raising our little daughter in this world, and my estimation is that refined sugar is probably about equivalent to the nervous system of a young child in terms of its ability to do the wrong things as cocaine. Now, I lived in Hollywood for a few years. If you can believe this, I've never had cocaine. I've certainly seen it once or twice at a party or two, but I've never had it. But I've been around people who have taken it, and just in my observation, like this is where I'm actually coming from, I think that giving a little child refined sugar, I would just as soon give them cocaine, because of the power of the concentration. And I have watched in grocery stores and whatever as a little 3-year-old child goes up and picks up the candy bar, and when the parent says no, and the child just goes into flailing scream, you know. One of our friends recently told us that he met a woman who he said is just one of the coolest women that he's ever met. And he said that her father hid the existence of sugar until she was a teenager. He managed to actually conceal the existence of sugar in reality from her. She didn't even know it existed until she was a teenager. And he said she was one of the coolest, most together people he had ever met. And I was like, yes, my theories are true. We have one anecdotal piece of evidence that I can use to keep sugar from the mouth of my child. I might be a little bit extreme. But the point is that sugar is a super stimulator, okay? As is cocaine, as is television, as is, in a more abstract way, moving pictures, especially the fast-cut moving pictures that we have in movies and in programming. Pornography, ultra-concentrated chimp sugar, okay? Like the tasty stuff for human chimps, those are super stimulators. And once you get exposed to one of them, they don't just give you a pleasure, they raise the bar. Okay? They give you a chemical release that you want to have again. And with so many of them out there now, they're always pulling on our attention, and we get habitually into these cycles of wake up, check email, check text messages, drink coffee, go call a few people who called us, get into their whole dramatic world, read some news online, eat some junk food. Who's been in one of these cycles once or twice in their life, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's very hard to get out. And that's not even counting the more powerful things like prescription drugs and other types of drugs and things that we can get into abusive patterns with. One of the things my wife and I, we really try to hold each other accountable for is to not have anything that is a super stimulator or anything that could have the potential to be addictive, whether it be news, text messages, or email, or recreational things, or any of that kind of stuff that is an everyday thing. Okay, just don't do it. There isn't anything to allow to have that kind of hold on you because of all the other implications. And so awareness and attention, and bringing attention and then maintaining it, staying here now through extended periods, and then bringing that awareness into each key aspect of your life, especially when it's with these things like email and sugar and caffeine and addictive relationships and pornography and all that stuff, bringing the attention whenever you are doing anything that has the potential to be dangerous is very important, because when you're there, you can see what it's doing to you. And when you're not there, you can't. You can't see all the other implications that it has. So presence is important for unplugging once in a while from the distraction machine, from the addictive distraction machine that is this reality that we live in. I'll also just give one more point, not to harp on this too much, but a few years ago, Dean, you here? This is probably, 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, or 10 or something. He and I, we were hanging out in his town in Florida, and we were talking, and we were talking about how long it had been since we'd been in a supermarket. And I said, I haven't been in a supermarket in a long time. And so we said, well, let's go in there and see what's going on. We also went into Walmart. I was like, I've never been in a Walmart. This is probably 10 years ago. I've never been in it. What are they doing in there? So we went on a little sociological, scientific excursion. And one of the things that really was interesting to me in the supermarket, when I was a kid, and I remember this well because I used to get a lot of them, we'd go into the supermarket and they would have the Hostess cupcakes and the Twinkies and all the junk food and the other brands, and we would often get a box of that stuff or a package and bring it home and then eat it. And what I noticed here was all of those what I thought of as regular-sized cupcakes and other cakes and things had all become miniaturized. And they were in these packages with the small one. And, on the outside it said, only 99.99 calories, And so I was standing there, I was thinking about it, and I thought, oh, I get it. When they make it smaller, you buy them thinking, I'll have the small one, but you actually eat more. That's pretty smart. And then once I got into direct response marketing, and I started learning the power of scientific marketing, where you run an advertisement, and then you see how 100 people respond to it, and how many call, or how many respond online, or how many respond by mail. And then of those, how many of those people take the next step, and how many of those take the next step. And then you tweak the headline, or you tweak the offer, or you tweak the guarantee or the price, and then it changes. And you're testing across broad swaths of human beings. You can create marketing that is no longer fair. It just works. And it works sometimes increasingly better, as long as you're evolving with your audience. And then I started working with bigger companies that do work on the internet, and companies that have reaches of millions and more. And then it struck me in the last few years that right now, like in this moment, on this planet, are awake and working a legion of brilliant, scientific-minded geniuses that are researching what pushes our buttons at a more and more refined level. And they're teaching that to large organizations and putting it in books. And it's working its way into the internet and everywhere else. And it's almost impossible to resist this stuff. I was talking to a gentleman that I know, kind of casually, very sophisticated guy, very, very successful, holds a very high power position in one of the most famous companies in the world. And he was telling me about video game research that they're doing, where they take children and they sit them in a chair and they have them play the video game, and they put all of the brain measuring equipment to watch the behavior of the brain, and they watch the behavior of the child's brain while they're playing the video game. And what they've learned, for example, is that the dopamine hit that gets you kind of charged up, that there's a reward coming, that there's actually a higher dopamine spike when the child sees that there's a reward that they could possibly get soon, maybe 10 seconds from now. It kind of comes onto the horizon or comes onto the screen. That's what gives them the dopamine hit, not actually getting it. So now what they can do is they can time the dopamine cycles, and they can actually make it so that it keeps giving you the hit of the drug and keeping it just beyond your reach to make the video game so it's addictive. And when I heard that, I said, that's scary. And that was a few years ago. So it's unfair, and it's not going backwards anytime soon. Okay? All of these researchers in the world are not going to all band together tomorrow and say, this stuff is just too powerful, and we're making too much money, and we're controlling too much behavior here, we're making way too much profit. We feel very guilty about this, so you know what, here, have your time and attention back. We're done. It's not going to happen. So the answer is, in a lot of ways, to take control of our attention, take control of our learning, take control of our environment. And I'm going to recommend what I consider some very rational steps in life, which to a lot of people look extreme, which is setting up a perimeter in your life to protect your most valuable resource, which is your attention. Setting up a perimeter physically, your physical environment, setting up emotionally and in your relationships, setting it up in your mind with how you think and what you practice. Because if not, those geniuses out there are going to get it. They're going to get it. All you have to do is turn your mind loose to go look at some normal news for a few minutes, and you'll get sucked into the rabbit hole. All right, so who's in for this game of taking back your attention? Yeah, good. I think the good news is that, like any other technology, these things that are being figured out by all these scientists, they can be used for good just as well as they can be used for evil. And we can take all of that great research and we can help people do good things with their lives and do productive things, rather than using it just to kind of take or mine them for what they have. The Greeks really figured something out that was a quantum leap for us humans, and that was this idea of think for yourself. Don't just take received wisdom and do it because that's the way everyone else does and that's the way they tell you should do it, but actually go in and validate what you're hearing for yourself. That was massive for our species. We should be very thankful to them. The next level of thinking for yourself, of self-direction, would include regularly thinking thoughts and doing actions that you have never done and you've never seen anyone do. It would be part of the definition of thinking for yourself because, by definition, you would be thinking for yourself. You'd be coming up with it on your own. Imitating what other people are doing is not thinking for yourself. Right? Wyatt said to be systematically outrageous. Systematically get out of your old habit patterns. So Wyatt was talking about this word meta, and you've heard me use it a few times. Let's get a little clearer about what we mean by meta, because it's an important distinction, and once we have it in our minds, we can go and we can apply it in different areas. So a great way to really get the word meta is to substitute the word about. Okay, about. To go meta to is to think about something. To go meta is to think about something. And that's part of our power as humans, is we can step back and take a perspective. When you go meta to yourself, you think about yourself. When you're not meta to yourself, you're just in yourself, experiencing life as it comes. When you go meta, you step outside of yourself and you consider yourself. You dissociate and you kind of turn a mirror on yourself. Now, there's a lot of recursion in meta conversations. So when you put the word meta before a term, so for example, let's say that you have a meta meeting. Okay? So what would a meta meeting be? It would be having a meeting about meetings. Okay? So if you had a meeting in your organization and you said, okay, in this meeting, we're going to discuss how we have meetings. And we're going to plan and structure the way we do meetings. It's a meeting about a meeting. That would be a meta meeting. A meta book would be a book about how to write a book. Yeah, that would be a meta book. Does that make sense? Going meta. I've done very well in the meta information product space and in the meta entrepreneurship space. So I've created a whole series of information products on how to create an information product. Entrepreneurship. I've created a series of products for entrepreneurs, right, on how to be an entrepreneur. And then I have a business. My entrepreneurial business is selling them. So I'm a meta entrepreneur. That's what this is here. This is kind of a meta entrepreneur environment. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm exchanging value on entrepreneurship itself. Yeah.
You go meta to that?
Yes. So that's what Wyatt was talking about, is going meta. Meta. I think that if we said it even too much, we might have a few people have actual brain damage from it. It's like one of those things that if you say it, meta, it feels like the universe could explode or something. You know what I mean? Like a wormhole could open and something scary could come out. It's very disorienting to think meta. So we will talk about it. We're going to get into it in a little bit here. But for now, let's just get what meta means. Going meta to something is thinking about it. But it's a great question. Yeah? All right. So what is meta learning? Meta learning is learning how to learn. It's a higher level of awareness about the process of learning itself. And Wyatt, God bless him, I understand this at a new level now. Meta learning is a radically altered state. because it's not like the state of mind that you're normally in. Because when you're meta-learning, you're not just letting your learning system run, you're consciously putting yourself into the state of body, emotion, mind, and you're paying attention to it, and you're with the process to make it far more efficient. Okay, that's meta-learning, learning how to learn. And it's a different state than you're normally in when you're learning. And I'll suggest that this awareness component that we're inserting here and practicing, not only is it valuable in meta-learning, but also in all these other areas of life. Next, let's talk about learning in 3 dimensions. Okay, 3 key dimensions. One of my favorite models that I use continually that's kind of always running, and I've used it through so many different domains that it's become automatic. It's become almost part of my strategy, is Paul MacLean's triune brain theory. Now, Paul MacLean was a scientist who studied the structure of the brain, and what he essentially noticed is that we have parts of our brain in common with older, kind of less sophisticated animals like reptiles, and we have another part that's in common with mammals, and then we have parts that seem unique to the human. So the older parts, kind of in the top of the spinal cord and the brainstem here, this is what he called the reptilian brain, the reptile brain. And this is the part of our brain that's concerned with survival in the physical world. It's a very physical brain, and it's very much the fight or flight part of our brain. It also kind of runs a lot of our autonomic nervous system. Next, around that structure, emerged the mammalian brain. And this is the emotional brain and the limbic system. And this model's a generalization. I just want to point out here. Some scientists don't like kind of how general it is and so forth, but it works really well for the purposes that we're going to use it for. So the mammalian brain, if we think of that as the social emotional brain, and if you look at mammals, they've gone from being solitary reptiles to being these group, family, clan, herd animals. And they do things that are really unusual and interesting. They have bonds with each other that are emotional, and they become distressed if they become separated from each other. They have certain types of communications with each other that reptiles don't have. And the emotional brain evolved and emerged with emotions and with social relationships all together. They're all part of one structure that allow us to come together into these herds, into these group packs, and survive better. And then around that grew the neocortex and these frontal lobes that we humans have. And this is where we can do the symbolic processing. This is where we can do the images and the words and why I was calling the digital up here. Well, these 3 domains, the physical, the emotional, and the conceptual, I think of them as being like 3 levels of reality. Each one has its own laws of physics. My wife pointed out that they each have their own laws of physics, totally different. And what's interesting too is in this whole idea of there's more than one universe that the physicists are all talking about right now, in the multiverse, different types of universes actually have different laws of physics in them. And I think that we already live in multiple types of universes because we have these 3 brains and we exist in these 3 domains. So the physical domain, and I'm giving you now kind of my take on this and the summary of it. The physical domain is a domain of cause and effect. It's a domain of zero sum, and it's a domain of scarcity. And that's the physical domain, stuff you can touch and feel. And what I mean by that is that out here in the physical domain, if I pick something up and then I drop it, or I let it go and gravity takes it, there's actually something moving that you can feel. And these things bump into each other. It's where you can set up a series of dominoes and push them over and they will all fall over. I mentioned it's a zero-sum game. It's also the domain where if there's some food in front of me and in front of you, if I take the food and I eat it, you can't have it. Okay, so it's a scarcity, zero-sum kind of game. And I think that that's one of the reasons why nature sometimes looks so brutal, because if you see two reptiles, if you see two Komodo dragons walk up next to each other and start threatening each other and then start fighting, like, they don't live in an abundance world. There's only so many, whatever, wildebeests on the island that they can eat, and the dominant one wants to make sure that it gets the wildebeest. Right? The emotional domain is a domain of synchrony, and it's a domain of equality. Okay, so not scarcity anymore, but more equality. And emotions are interesting because they catch. If you're in a group of people, and all of a sudden all the people in the group start feeling a particular emotion and then start expressing it, it's infectious. It kind of comes into you. If you've ever been with your family, this is the place where you can spot it the most. If someone starts getting angry or upset, it just goes right through everyone. Yeah. So emotions, they almost automatically distribute themselves through the group, through others that are around. And we really want other people to feel what we're feeling. We want them to feel the emotions that we're feeling so that we can be attuned to them. And then the conceptual intellectual space, as I mentioned earlier, this is an abundance domain. If I give you an idea that I have, I don't not have the idea anymore. You now have it, and now you can give me one. And both of us not only got to give the other one the idea, but we also got the practice of teaching, which allowed us to learn it and see it at a meta level, to actually see it from a higher perspective. So this is an abundance domain. 3 domains of life, 3 different sets of laws of physics, 3 different rules for success that we experience there. Also, though, 3 different types of learning. Okay, 3 different types of learning. So the physical world is kind of dominated by learning through repetition, through action, and through muscle memory. You do something, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then eventually you're doing it automatically. Okay, so if you learn to swing the golf club, you do the swing, you get correction, you do the swing, you get correction, and eventually you get to the point where you can do the golf swing and you don't have to think about how to do the golf swing. Now you can focus on other things, like the direction you want it to go. I was talking to my friend Andrew here about archery, and he was saying archery is kind of a trip because, you think, and I'm not an archer, but I'm very interested in it and would love to play around with it at some point. So anyway, he's saying it's not like you take the bow and arrow and you pull it back and you look straight down the arrow to aim. You kind of hold the bow and arrow down here, and you learn intuitively to feel where the arrow is going to go. If you do it enough times, though, you get the muscle memory, and then you know. And that's one form of physical learning. Emotional learning is it's really not like that. It's very distinct. Yeah? So emotional learning can be, when I'm with another person, I feel a certain way when I'm with them and their emotions. And if we're together enough, we get into synchrony, and I know that's how I'm going to feel when I'm with them. Yeah? So we can learn emotionally. Also, we can have emotions about emotions. We can have meta-emotions, which we won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but maybe we'll come back to at some point. Yeah, and meta-emotions, they actually can bind each other and they can freeze each other. It's very hard to get out of. It's one thing to feel fear, but it's a whole other thing to be embarrassed about your fear. If you're embarrassed about fear, or you have shame about fear, or you have anger about fear, it's hard to get to the fear because you've got this other layer that's kind of frozen over it. And then there's intellectual learning. There's symbolic learning. Learning math, like pure math, is very different from learning how to hit a golf ball in a certain way. And then there's all of these acting together, which they actually do most of the time. There's some of each of them involved as a human. But it turns out that by differentiating them and practicing them individually, and then integrating them and practicing them together, you become a much more powerful learner. Okay, so there's a clue. differentiating them, and then integrating them. This is an idea that I got from really the transmission of it from Ken Wilber. And if you look at how evolution happens, whether it be galaxies or plants or humans, it's a process of differentiation and then integration. Differentiation and integration. Cells differentiated and they reproduced by cell division. And then the individual cells got together and they made tissues. They differentiated and then they integrated. And then tissues differentiated on a higher level and integrated and created organs. And organs differentiated on a higher level again and then integrated with each other to create full bodies. So on all these levels, there's differentiation and there's integration. And by practicing differentiation at more and more refined and granular levels all the way down, and then integrating them all together into more and more complex and diverse forms, that's the key right there. That's how we do everything. And if you look at that map and what we're doing here, that's what we're doing. We're differentiating experiences, we're differentiating concepts, we're differentiating levels, and then we're putting them back together into tools and systems that we can use. Differentiation and integration. If I had one kind of great concept to take with me through all the learning that I do in the future, that might be it, is differentiation and integration. Differentiation and integration. We learned about attention, and we learned about different orders of existence, and we learned about meta. And we now understand a little bit better insight into meta learning, learning about learning, looking at it from a higher level. So here's the tough question. What is meta attention? Learning about attention? Putting your attention on your attention. That's close enough. Okay? Putting your attention on your attention. Do you have a different one?
I'll just say you have all the micro details and the big picture at the same time.
The micro details and the big picture at the same time. I'm going to go with this, guys, but thank you for it's good. Okay, we can keep that. Actually, we want to go there next. We want to start even going to more refined details of attention and then combining them together to wake the whole system up. Right? But putting attention on attention itself. So we practice directing our attention. We direct it into our feet and into our hands, into our emotions, into our thoughts, and then we notice, hey, wait a minute. There's something that I'm directing that isn't my body, and it's not my emotions, and it's not my thoughts. There's something meta, something trans or beyond those that I can direct with my will. And we felt that attention. What would it be like right now if you put attention on attention itself? Now, when you do this, when you practice it, and you keep coming back to it, you would be experiencing roughly what my wife would call nowing. Nowing. The experience of being here now. We might also call this, so that we have a different term and something that's a little bit more specific, we might call that awareness. We might call attention on attention awareness. Because you can be directing your attention and you can say, oh, I feel my foot, I feel the temperature, I feel my emotions, I can notice my thoughts. But that's your attention doing those things where you're actually paying attention to the sensations or the thoughts. You're not really in a more expansive awareness of the process of doing that itself. Yeah? So just like we can take attention and bring it and extend it and integrate it with movement and learning and other things, we can even go to a meta level of attention to what here we may call awareness, and we can bring awareness to what we're doing. I'll give you some tips for how to do this in a moment. We'll do some practices in another session. But that's the distinction we want to open up. That's what the point of this session is about, is get to meta attention, to awareness. So we discussed learning, and then we discussed learning how to learn, and then we got into this other territory that we said is a little scary and might make us loopy. Learning how to learn, meta learning. It took me a long time of geeking on that one to grab it and to understand what it is. Wyatt gave some clues here. Let's use a term to describe learning how to learn. Let's call that adaptation. Really, learning is an adaptation, but let's call learning how to learn an adaptation, where you're coming into a new environment, a new situation, and you are intentionally figuring it out. You're figuring it out so you have mastery over it, and you're watching how you learn. You're using conscious learning principles and strategies. Okay, so let's call that adaptation. What if you go and adapt to several different environments? So, for example, let's say you go and learn a musical instrument, and then you play in a musical band, and you do some recordings, and you really adapt to that environment. You learn all the rules. And then let's say that you go and you start a business, and you build a business, and you have a successful business. And then let's say you get into a romantic relationship, and you figure out all the things you need to do to manage conflict and to have intimacy and so forth. You master those three areas. You really successfully adapt to all three. What happens is patterns emerge that those three have in common. Okay, patterns emerge. You start to see where, oh, this worked over here. I can take part of that and use it over here, but the expression of it is different. Right? So, for example, in business, one of the things that I learned is that it's really important to help get the group, if you have a team, let's say you have a team of 10 people, it's important to help get the group all on the same page. Get their values aligned, get their stories aligned, get their ideas aligned about what the business is doing. You follow? Get everyone emotionally on the same page and motivated to make the business go. And then I've learned over here in my relationship, well, look at this. It's important that we get on the same page. Emotionally, we're going the same direction, we have the same values, and where we don't, we've got to fix that, and we've got to get those values aligned, or else we're going to have lots of friction. And when I see that pattern, I say, wow, look at that. That's a higher principle. Once I know that, then I can go into any new area and I can say, that whole thing of aligning on values, aligning emotions, aligning our motivation, aligning our thoughts, aligning our incentives, I'll bet you that applies here, and let me see how. And things will pop out as I'm learning there that wouldn't have popped out before. Okay, and I'll be able to go much faster. If I go in and adapt to several different situations, and then I see the patterns that those different adaptations have in common, I'm now meta-adapting, or becoming what I call an adaptationist. Okay, an adaptationist. Okay, where my identity is around the skill that I'm really trying to develop is to go into new situations, new environments, new social situations, new complex business situations, and adapt. And when you start becoming fascinated with adapting to new worlds, your esteem around adapting grows and increases. Only when you have successfully adapted to multiple diverse environments and then stepped back and seen the patterns and experienced them, felt them, do you really experience what it is to be an adaptationist. It's not something that I can tell you how to do so that you'll go, yep, now I get it. I can tell you how to do it so you can go do it, and then you can notice for yourself. Right? But that's what we're about here. That's my secret agenda in this program, is to give you my best tools for being an adaptationist in your life. The higher level patterns. And then what we're actually doing is we're using things like marketing and product and business as our practicing tools so that we're already operating at a level meta to all of that. So we do them all and we get all the results and we create great products and we make lots of money and we get lots of customers and we build a successful business, but we actually get something from it, an esteem and a set of skills that's an order of magnitude more powerful. All right, so who's in for becoming an adaptationist, for mastering adaptation to new environments? Let's hear that again. Awesome. All right, everybody give me a woohoo. All right, good. Yeah. So go to 3 people and look them in the eye and say, I'm an adaptationist. So I'm going to bring some of the things that we've been discussing here down to a few principles. And we're going to call them the laws of adaptation. Okay, the laws of adaptation. You're going to hear things you've already heard, but you're going to hear them a different way. Right? The first law is know what you want. Okay, so these would be rules, directives. We'll call them laws because it makes them sound fancy. Know what you want. Wyatt said it. If you know what you want, you now have a north pole or a north star that can guide you. Okay, it allows you to see everything that you're experiencing and learning in a context that helps you get the most possible leverage out of it. Number 2 is a mindset that I call figure it out. In NLP, they have a presupposition. It goes like this. Possible in the world and possible for me is a matter of how. And what that means is that if it is possible for someone to do it in the world, then it's possible for me, and it's only a matter of me figuring out how to do it. Okay, so possible in the world, possible for me. The difference, it's just a matter of how. And I have the phrase, I say to myself, I say to others, figure it out, or we just have to figure it out. When I come across something that I don't understand, or I can't navigate my way around it, or it challenges me, or it's an obstacle, I say, okay, this is something I'm going to have to figure out. I'm going to have to understand how this works and get the skill so that I can get around it and get on to the next level. Part of the figure it out mindset, maybe like a bullet underneath it, is the more challenging it is to figure out, the more of an advantage it's going to give me. So for example, in business, when I run up against a hard nut to crack, I'm trying to get into a company to get a partnership with them and get them to put our content on their website, and it's really hard. It's hard to network in there or to call in there. I say, well, that's good because it means that other people in my space probably haven't done it, and it's going to be really hard for them. And so let's redouble our efforts, because once we do, right, we're going to have a real advantage here. And so part of figure it out is that once you do, you bring a huge advantage. Warren Buffett talks about how he loves businesses with moats around them. Right? Natural barriers to entry. When something's hard to figure out, it often creates a really great moat or great barrier to entry. And if you put a few of those together in your business, you have a really great advantage. Number 3. As an adaptationist, what you want to do is you want to learn from others. You want to come into a situation and get all the experience that others have put in the time, effort, energy, money to get before you start going and figuring it out for yourself, before you start doing the trial and error thing. So when learning from others, what most people do is they just say, show me how you do it. I just want to watch you do it. And that's important. We want to watch how people do things. But there's a much more sophisticated way to approach getting expertise from other people. And that is to understand their model of the world. Understand how they see reality. Okay, I've learned from NLP, and I've learned a lot from Wyatt as well. Wyatt is a master modeler. He trains people to go in and model the world space of other people and then to transfer that knowledge. And the 3 levels that are really important to go after are, number 1, what is the person's model of the world? Number 2, what is their identity or their self-model? In other words, what's their model of themselves? How do they see themselves? And then number 3 is their beliefs. There's some overlap here, but the highest level, right, what's their reality? Robert Anton Wilson would call it a reality tunnel. What tunnel do they look through to see reality? What is their set of beliefs, basically, about the whole thing? How do they think reality works? Right? The second is themselves. What's their identity? How do they see themselves? How do they label themselves? And then, beliefs. What do they believe about the area? Wyatt told the story at one of our programs about how he went in and he helped the Army do a modeling program where they took expert shooters with a pistol and transfer that knowledge from the experts to all of the, what do you call those new people that are learning how to use a gun? The recruits? I don't know. The wannabes. And they had a whole training program that was very sequential. And what Wyatt did is he went in and he said to the master marksmen and the master shooters, he said, "What do you believe about the gun?" And it turned out that people that didn't have experience with guns believed things like guns are dangerous and the gun might backfire and the gun might hurt me, whereas the experts, the masters, they believed things like the gun is inherently safe and the gun is my friend and the gun will protect me, for example. They had a different set of beliefs. And so when transferring the knowledge, when doing the training, what Wyatt would do is take the new recruits and start off by having them close their eyes and lay back in a relaxed state and say the affirmations of all of the beliefs into their mind so that they could first get programmed on a higher level about what this is all about. So when I'm learning from a master, what I want to know is, what do you think reality is? Why do you think there's something rather than nothing? What's your model of how all this stuff came to be? You believe in evolution, science, God? Like what? How does reality work for you? And where did that come from? Did you get an education in the church? Did you come up through school? Did you, were you on tour with a circus? Like, how did you learn about how reality works? And what are your beliefs about reality? And then identity. Okay, what do you think of yourself? How do you see yourself? What's your role in the world? And beliefs. What do you believe is true? What do you believe is true about particularly the situation that you're after? And if you start at these higher levels of reality, identity, and then belief, those are the bubbles or the contexts that reasoning and thought and action happen within. Those are always running. Human beings don't do things that violate their model of the world, their identity, and their beliefs. Generally speaking, they don't, unless they're backed up against the wall. And so even though they're doing all the things that they're doing, and you could be watching them do them, you could say, well, I could just copy that. Maybe that will help me get the results. There's something to that. But they're also operating these other layers. Okay, so those are the high ones. And adaptationists, that's where they start when they're modeling another person and learning from them. I don't really want to know how someone does something until I understand those things, generally speaking. Next, get feedback. Okay, Wyatt talked about feedback being information that's a product of the system that's fed back into the system in such a way that it alters what you do. It alters your behavior. In business, we'll learn about things like dashboards and updates and charts and reports that you have your team do so that you have a more objective mirror. It's like driving a big truck and not being able to see behind you and putting one of those big giant mirrors on the truck. That's what feedback is like. It allows you to see things around you, become more aware of what's happening. Putting feedback systems in place, including dashboards, including getting feedback from your team, including getting other people's thoughts from the outside, is very important because we can get lost in the cul-de-sacs of our self-validating minds, and feedback is super important. And then finally, and I alluded to this early on in the program, the most profound and powerful thing you can do is to surround yourself with successful adapters. Okay, surround yourself with successful adapters. Not just people who are successful at doing something over and over, but people that are really seeking to become adaptationists. That's what they're about. And because of the miracle of the internet and knowledge and just the explosion of awareness around a lot of these things, there are a lot of people who are adaptationists out there. We're really interested in going and learning one area and then going and learning another area and another area and then seeing the abstract patterns and going to the next level in their lives. Who here, you really already consider yourself, before we did this, you really kind of consider yourself an adaptationist. You like adapting to new environments. Yeah? Good. Great. So surround yourself with other successful adapters, because that information is valuable when you're both speaking the same language. Then when you ask them, hey, how do I write a good marketing headline? Or teach me that strategy that you're using to market using social media or whatever. They'll communicate it to you adapter to adapter. Right? And they'll connect it up to other things that you would be very interested in, rather than just kind of showing you where to point and click or what to do. Yeah. What are 3 areas of life that you would really be interested in learning about and adapting to next? Okay, after, let's say, entrepreneur. That maybe you've dabbled in a little bit or started, or maybe you're just on the horizon for you. What are 3 areas of life that you would really be interested in adapting to that you haven't yet? The more diverse, the better. Three areas of life, 3 domains where you would love to go and adapt, learn the area, learn all those lessons, and really have that as a part of your being. I've been fortunate to spend some time with Dr. Nathaniel Branden, who's, a lot of people think of him as the kind of the godfather of self-esteem. He wrote some great books. I highly recommend The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem if you haven't studied self-esteem work. Self-esteem is really a meta concept. Okay, it's kind of the reputation that you have with yourself. And self-esteem is comprised, in Nathaniel Branden's definition, of 2 things. One of them is kind of this reputation that you have. The other is your feeling of deserving of happiness. And deserving of happiness is another kind of meta concept, right? Feeling deserving of happiness. All right, so again, definition of self-esteem, just quickly, is number 1, confidence in your ability to deal with challenges that life throws at you, to kind of cope with them. And over here, it's deserving of happiness. Okay, so just your confidence, your general confidence that you can cope with what life throws at you, and then the feeling of deserving of happiness. Self-esteem is extremely important as an adaptationist, because most people, when they come up against something new that they haven't encountered before, and they encounter a little resistance, they just go, okay, no problem, I'll just leave that one alone. And they just walk away. And they assume that it can't be figured out. Whereas someone with a high level of self-esteem, they can cope with the pushback, and they can say, oh yeah, that's part of life, and they can keep going. And as you adapt to multiple environments, you become more confident in your ability to adapt to multiple environments. I'm not talking about cockiness or arrogance or becoming, what might be called hubris or overconfident, where you do reckless things. I'm just talking about having the self-image that you can figure things out. So it's important to adapt to multiple environments, to build your own self-esteem in the world that's coming, because most people believe still, based on the old paradigm, all they have to do is learn how to do a job or learn how to learn a skill or a trade, and then they're going to be okay for the rest of their lives, rather than getting their awareness on the higher level. What are the patterns that connect all of these areas of learning and adaptation, so that as they come into new areas and they face new adaptive challenges, instead of saying, I don't want to hassle with that, or oh, that's too much, they say, great, another challenge, and wow, look at this one. This one's hard. This is going to give me great advantage to adapt to this one. And it can energize instead. And so we want to have our esteem tied to our ability to adapt. And that's why we pursue this. That's why we pursue these things that are very uncomfortable. Because when you come into a new environment with new people, in a new culture, with new values, with new ideas, with new customs and new ways of doing things, it can be very intimidating. You can feel really outside your comfort zone for a lot of the time. Okay?